questions. Question orale. L'honorable leader.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. For 10 years, the authoritarian government in Beijing has been trying to intervene to help this Prime Minister politically, beginning with a donation of $200,000 to the Trudeau Foundation. Since then, our intelligence services have informed the Prime Minister that this government interfered in 2 elections to support the Liberal Party, and the Prime Minister did absolutely nothing about it. Will he finally allow a public inquiry, an independent inquiry, so that Canadians find out the truth? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it will be no surprise to you that I don't agree with the Leader of the Opposition. He falsely claims that this government has done nothing. We took action as soon as we took office, Mr. Speaker, to counter foreign interference in our elections. In fact, we were the only government to have done so. As my friend opposite, when he was minister responsible for democratic institutions, he did nothing. He did nothing when intelligence services raised this question over 10 years ago.
Well, we didn't have to, because the dictatorship, the communist dictatorship in Beijing, was not helping the Conservative Party get elected. Contrary to that, for 10 years, the communist dictatorship in Beijing has been helping the Prime Minister. They gave $200,000 in donations to the Trudeau Foundation. They interfered in 2 successive elections to help the Liberals win. And the Prime Minister knew about it after numerous briefings to that effect. He's done absolutely nothing to stop it because he benefits from it. Will he finally allow a public and truly independent investigation of it? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs.
We take the issue of foreign interference in Canada's electoral system and any foreign interference very seriously. Mr. Speaker, that's why when we formed government, we took a number of unprecedented steps that did not exist when my friend was a minister in the previous government. We created the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. Precisely so. Parliamentarians from all political parties could have access to classified information and publish reports for Canadians. We set up an independent panel of senior public servants, Mr. Speaker, to follow exactly the issue of foreign interference in the elections, and will continue to do more.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, all they've done is had the former CEO of the China-financed Trudeau Foundation to write a report about it, in which he unsurprisingly says, don't worry, be happy. And we know why the Liberals want to cover this up. They benefited from Beijing's interference in 2 successive elections. The question is, why isn't the NDP actually doing its job? They've been working against transparency and preventing top Liberal campaign operatives and PMO officials from testifying in committee. Why won't the NDP stop its cover-up coalition and allow top-level officials to testify and answer questions?
The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition wants top-level officials to testify publicly before parliamentary committees. The good news is that's exactly what they did last week, Mr. Speaker. The heads of our intelligence agencies, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister. I know my friend will be very excited to know that I'm going to the Procedures Committee myself on Thursday and be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Speaker. From the beginning, we have said that we take this issue very seriously. We've put in place unprecedented steps to deal with foreign interference, and will continue to do more.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, we learned that the Prime Minister now has a big announcement to make at 5 p.m. today. This after 10 years of having known that Beijing was interfering to support him with donations to the Trudeau Foundation and help in numerous federal election campaigns. Now he's announcing something. And we know that he's probably going to try to sweep this under the rug by naming a Liberal establishment insider to have a secretive process that will never bring about the truth. What we don't know for sure is whether the NDP is once again going to be a co-conspirator in making that happen. Will we have a final and clear public investigation so Canadians know the truth?
The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition was Minister responsible for democratic reform in the previous Conservative government. In 2013, CSIS identified foreign interference as a challenge in the electoral context. Mr. Harper's former national security advisor raised this publicly in 2010, 13 years ago, Mr. Speaker. And when my honourable friend was a minister responsible for this very file, he did absolutely nothing to deal with the question of foreign interference. I know he's frustrated that we've done so much, and the good news, Mr. Speaker, is we'll continue to do more because we take this issue very seriously.
The
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Across the floor and let me know that the Trudeau Foundation had received $200,000 from Beijing. Let me know that the dictatorship in Beijing was planning to interfere in successive elections to help Liberals get elected. If they had been transparent about that back then, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. Instead, we've had 10 years of cover-ups from this Prime Minister who's benefited from the interference, known about it, been briefed on it, done nothing except try to sweep it under the rug. Will the NDP stop covering up for the Liberals and get top PMO and Liberal Party officials to answer questions before our committee?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just because the Leader of the Opposition keeps insisting on a falsehood doesn't make it real. He knows very well, Mr. Speaker, that our government took unprecedented steps to deal with this issue because we take it seriously. A panel of senior public servants, chaired by the Clerk of the Privy Council, setting up in law the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, including representatives, Mr. Speaker, from all political parties. We have taken this issue seriously. We have made senior officials available at parliamentary committees, and will continue to do everything we can to strengthen Canadian democratic institutions.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the Globe and Mail's revelations about Chinese interference are cause for concern. Whether the outcome of the last election would have been different isn't the question. When the integrity of the electoral process is threatened, it's the responsibility of all of us here in this House to stand up for it. It's the public confidence in our democratic system that's at stake here. This goes well beyond partisan issues. Will the Prime Minister call an independent public inquiry into foreign interference in our elections? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable colleague that this issue should be nonpartisan in the sense that we all have a shared interest in strengthening and defending our democratic institutions. Our government has taken a number of steps, strong steps, that have been evaluated by independent experts following the last election. But, Mr. Speaker, we are always looking for new steps we can take, hopefully with the support of all members here, to strengthen our democratic system. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Well, speaking of experts, Jean-Pierre Kingsley, the former chief electoral officer, Gerald Butts, the PM's former advisor, and even Maurice Rosenberg all agree that we need an inquiry into the integrity of our elections. No matter how hard you think about it, we can't imagine who would be against shedding light on any threat to the functioning of our democratic system. We can't afford to have doubts about the legitimacy of any single member here in this House, Mr. Speaker. We really don't want that. What's it going to take for this government to set up a commission of inquiry that's public and independent into foreign interference in our elections? The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Speaker, I think our government has shown a great deal of transparency in our efforts to counter foreign interference in our elections and our democratic system. We're looking forward to working with all members, both here and in the other place, and that is precisely why we set up the National Committee of Parliamentarians, who are tasked specifically with examining this type of question and reporting to Canadians. We've created monitoring agencies to make sure that our democratic institutions are protected, but we are still looking for other solutions while we're at it.
Canadians are very troubled
the allegations of foreign interference in our elections. But the Prime Minister doesn't seem concerned at all. The former head of CSIS, the former head of Elections Canada, and even Morris Rosenberg, who wrote the 2021 Federal Election Report, are all encouraging the Prime Minister to go forward with a national public inquiry on foreign interference. The PROC Committee of the House of Commons has even adopted an NDP motion that this House vote may vote on soon, calling for a public inquiry as well. So why is the Prime Minister so opposed? Why is he refusing to get answers for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our government is taking the issue of foreign interference in Canada's democratic institutions very seriously. As my colleague heard, our government has taken unprecedented steps since we formed the government in 2015 to put in place a series of measures precisely to provide greater transparency and understanding to Canadians on a threat, Mr. Speaker, that has existed for well more than 13 years and which has been publicly discussed for over a decade. The good news, Mr. Speaker, is our government takes it seriously, and the good news is the 2019 and 2021 elections were decided freely and fairly by Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, in a democratic society, few things are more critical than the integrity of the election process and trust in institutions. There are serious allegations of interference, and it's this Prime Minister's responsibility to launch a public inquiry to get to the bottom of it. People deserve transparency. The former head of CSIS and Elections Canada, former senior public servant Morris Rosenberg, and a House of Commons committee are pushing for a public inquiry. So why is the Prime Minister saying no? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable colleague that confidence in our institutions, public institutions, and public confidence are important. We've taken these allegations very seriously from the moment we took office. We took a number of steps, including legislative steps to ensure that our democratic institutions are protected from foreign interference. It's unacceptable, and as my colleague knows full well, we share his concern. And the good news is, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to do what's necessary.
We found out that CSIS uncovered a plan to influence the Prime Minister with a $200,000 donation to the Trudeau Foundation from agents of the communist regime in Beijing. The response? Blame CSIS. Another page out of the playbook of divide, distract, deflect, and deny while the confidence in our democracy hits an all-time low. The Prime Minister needs to end the cover-up and come clean with Canadians about what he knew and when he knew it. The Prime Minister refuses. What's he hiding?
The Honourable Minister of Justice. Public Safety.
Speaker, as my honourable colleague, the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, has said, we take the threat of foreign interference very seriously, which is why we have taken concrete action, like putting in place threat reduction measures for CSIS, like cracking down on foreign funding, which could interfere with our domestic elections, Mr. Speaker, but with the corresponding transparency through the creation of bodies like the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians to ensure that we're upfront with Canadians, Mr. Speaker. All members should be united in protecting our elections. They are sacrosanct. Canadians and Canadians alone determine them. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, the allegations of foreign interference are serious, and they deserve a serious response from a serious Prime Minister. They need to be investigated, and they need to be investigated by a credible, nonpartisan, and independent body. They need to be investigated by Parliament, not by Liberal insiders. With the help of the NDP, the Prime Minister is refusing to send his Chief of Staff to committee. So I'll ask again, what is he hiding?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
This government, under the leadership of this Prime Minister, that created the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians to encourage and foster collaboration across partisan lines, because this is an issue that transcends that dynamic, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to shine a light on the threats that are posed by foreign interference so that we can protect our democratic institutions, especially elections, because Canadians and Canadians alone must be reassured that they determine their elections and no one else. Thank you.
The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, for years, CSIS has tracked Beijing's foreign interference and has said that, quote, foreign interference is a serious threat to the security of Canada, end quote. For years, CSIS has advised the Prime Minister that, quote, Canada can make use of a policy that is grounded in transparency and sunlight in order to highlight the point that foreign interference should be exposed to the public, end quote. So will the Prime Minister heed this advice, be transparent, and let PMO officials testify before a parliamentary committee?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
I appreciate my colleague's question, and I also embrace his concerns around transparency. And this is a government that has raised the bar of transparency through the creation of NCCOP, through the creation of the National Security Intelligence Review Agency, which both have robust access to classified information so that we can be upfront with Canadians in the ways in which we are protecting all of our institutions, especially elections. And Mr. Speaker, as my colleague, the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, said, good news. Two independent panels have concluded that both of the elections in 2019 and 2021 are free and fair, and we will continue this work together. Thank you.
The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, they concluded overall they were free and fair. Mr. Speaker, last election, the G7 Rapid Response Mechanism in Global Affairs Canada tracked Chinese Communist Party interference targeting candidates like Kenny Chiu. But despite Global Affairs tracking interference in real time during the election, nothing was done. Kenny Chiu was not informed. Clearly, the critical election incident protocol did not work. Since the PMO had a hand in setting up this protocol, will the PMO let PMO officials testify in front of a committee in order to tell us why the protocol was set up the way it was?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, as my colleague knows, this government set up the site panel and the critical incident reporting protocol to ensure that independent, nonpartisan, professional public servants would make decisions about which allegations of foreign interference would be disclosed, Mr. Speaker. That is a process that has served our democracy well, and now we will take the recommendations from Morris Rosenberg, work closely with the public service to implement them so that we can build on the strong track record of this government, which remains vigilant and clear-eyed about fighting against the threats of foreign interference.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Prime Minister denied the allegations of foreign interference in our elections by the communist regime in Beijing. He thought that by sweeping it under the rug, people would forget about it. But no, there have been lots of revelations in the news, and there's no end. We're learning new things each and every day about Beijing's foreign interference in our elections. While the Prime Minister turns a blind eye, the Trudeau Foundation refunded $200,000 to a Chinese businessman. Why does the Prime Minister refuse to call a public inquiry into Beijing's interference in our elections? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government, as my colleague put it so well, we take the question seriously, and we have been taking it seriously ever since we took office. He claims that we've turned a blind eye, but that's not true, and he knows that full well, because if his government had taken the threat seriously, because the threat has been around for over 10 years, they would have taken strong steps like we did, specifically to counter this unacceptable interference, and we will continue to do everything that needs to be done to strengthen our institutions. The honourable member, he wants to go back to 2013. Okay, let's go back to a business group for liberal funding. And one of the questions was, the Prime Minister answered, I have some admiration for China because the system has allowed them to transform their economy overnight. That's the Liberal Party's view of things. The Beijing regime took sophisticated steps to disrupt our elections in 2021, and that's what the Globe and Mail reported. Why are they dismissing Katie Tilford as a witness at committee, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, my colleague harkened back to 2013. I think that is when CSIS had identified the threat of Chinese interference potentially in our elections, and who was the minister in 2013? Who was responsible for the integrity of democratic institutions? It was the current leader of the opposition. And in 2013, Mr. Speaker, he did nothing. In 2014, he did nothing. And he did nothing in 2015 either. The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, it's one way or the other. Either there was interference by the Chinese authorities in our electoral system and everything must be done to put an end to it, or there was no interference and a commission of inquiry will help restore public confidence in our system. Either way, it's the best thing to do. It's the only thing to do to ensure maintaining public trust in our institutions. So what's it going to take for this government to set up a public and independent commission of inquiry? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said a few minutes ago, as soon as we took office, we acknowledged the threat of possible foreign interference in our elections and with our democratic institutions, and that's why we amended the Elections Act when it came to foreign contributions to our election campaigns, and that is why, through legislation, we created a bill that struck a committee responsible, a watchdog committee with representation from all parties, including the Bloc, and we referred those important questions to those members of that committee. The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, let's get serious. The Prime Minister must be aware of the very bad signal he's sending by refusing to call for an inquiry. What's he trying to hide? Who is he trying to protect? Who's involved and how? That's not the kind of message that he should be sending. The message should be, we will never let anyone interfere in our electoral system, and we'll do everything in our power to prevent foreign interference. Mr. Speaker, in order to do that, it takes a public and independent commission of inquiry. Will they set up a public and independent commission of inquiry? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable colleague. We need to work together and do everything that needs to be done to protect Canada's elections and democratic institutions. The good news, Mr. Speaker, is that that's exactly what we've been doing ever since we took office. And also, Mr. Speaker, we are constantly looking for advice on ways to strengthen the already strong steps we've taken, and we will continue to do everything that needs to be done precisely because we share the opinion of my honourable colleague that interference is wholly unacceptable. The honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee passed a motion calling for a public and independent commission of inquiry into foreign interference in our elections. The committee also agreed with the Bloc's proposal that the inquiry chair should be agreed on by all parties in this House. Why? Because this has to go beyond partisanship. What matters is the integrity of our electoral system. Will the government accept the committee's request and set up a commission of inquiry into foreign interference into our elections? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable colleague that we need to work together as parliamentarians precisely to counter the issue of foreign interference in our democratic institutions. My colleague knows full well because she's a member of the committee. I'm looking forward to seeing her when I myself will appear there on Thursday. We've been transparent with members, but we've also taken strong steps to counter foreign interference, and those measures, those steps are working well.